Hi everybody, welcome to the hull finished. This is part 3 of the hull section where I get an opportunity to share with you some of the modifications that I had to make in order to get to the finished result. As I was reviewing the first 2 portions, I realized that there was quite a few things that I left out, and hopefully this will be clarification for you. Thanks for stopping through. Okay, probably the most challenging part of this whole portion is the contour of the bow. Now, this side looks relatively smooth, but notice how in each set of 4, they went smoothly too, and then as the contour of the bow started getting more and more tapered, I had to bend and twist the plank to get it into place. Now this side looks relatively smooth. There were no excessive edges that I had to worry about. It didn't buckle in as I put the planks in against the frames. This actually was the finished attempt. As you can see here against the boxwood keel, how it looks, and how the change of the light wood and the dark wood come into play. This particular piece of dark section was where, as I was putting the plank in and sanding it down, I pushed too far in and snapped it and had to fill it in with putty. So that's how I ended up getting to the part where you see it now. This side was actually the first side I put in, and as you can see, there were a lot of challenges. Again, you still see the 4 planks that I did that seemed to work well. You know, these 4 went in relatively straight from front to back, no issues. And then the more I got toward the contour of the bow, the more I was having challenges. Now, there were several ways I can do that. Now, I showed you the picture of the result of 2 different attempts to do this. Now, to cut down on as much sanding as possible, because I didn't want to sand these planks this way too narrow, because, like I said, my finger will push through it, break it, and then I have to find a way to fix it. So what I end up doing is gluing these strips right on top of the planks, right? Right on top of the planks that were in place, right? And then sanding it down so that it was smooth. So, not exactly putty, but it worked out as a good filler. You see here in this section, and this section here, and this section here, how when I glued it down with the wood glue, pressed it and made sure that it was secure, and buffed it out on some, crazy shapes. But as you can see, it looks fairly good. There are some divot points in here with me, again, using the chisels to try and take the bulk of the planks out. You see this contour here versus this contour here, but in looking at it, you can see that this is an indentation compared to this, and you see I tried to fill it up with putty because for some reason it was in between the 2 frames, and the wood was just so brittle because it didn't have anything to hold on to. I broke several planks trying to put this in. So between soaking it, twisting it, and bending it, this one turned out to be more of a challenge than the other one. And as you can see here on the ends, like in the first video I showed you about the hull, I snapped this portion, and then this caved in, and then this caved in, and then this caved in. But you can see where I put a strip in, a plank in, to compensate for the gap. And I stopped at a certain point because the more work I did, the worse of result I achieved. And then at some point, I just stopped being a perfectionist and just decided to leave it where it is now. It may tend to add toward the weatherness of the hull. I don't know. I'm going to judge the end result, but you can see that this side, after gaining some knowledge from this side, looks a lot better, but you know, they both work. Okay, so these are the sections that I wanted to show you as the end result of doing the hull, and I hope to show you more as time goes on. And excuse so many uhs, I will edit them out and you'll see what I'm talking about later. Hey everybody. So, in following up with the pictures that you saw before, I wanted to share something with you about the back of the ship that I'm working on. So, the last frame that I used, right, the cutout for the last frame, right? So, that was this part right here. So, this particular cutout I used, right, on top of this, right? And I cut it out because of the blocks that I used that come with the ship for the rear needed something to fill up that hole. So I cut out the insert, cut this part, and as you will note, since it's very, very small, right, I'll pick this up, you'll see this part in the back right here is very, very small. I know it's got a lot of extra parts on it, but I wanted to show you what the process was for putting it together. So this piece here, I already pre-cut, right? So, slide along there, and then you can pull this out, right? So, as you can see, it looks like this, right? So now, and of course you can see that would be the whole thing put together, right? So we're only going to use this part, and I wanted to show you what happens. I cut the excess off, and it looks like that, right? So I would keep trimming, and that would go underneath here, right? That will go in this part right here to shore up the back of the boat where everything came into play here, right? So actually, it's where the blocks are concerned, it's all the way down here. So I just wanted to get it right. So when the planks came out on the long end, right, and I wanted to make a smooth transition, this actually had to go right here because the blocks here were right underneath the blocks there. So this is actually what it would look like. Now, a couple of things. I used balsa wood instead of boxwood. Balsa wood is extremely soft, and you can almost scratch this thing, right, and make a depression out of it. So when I sanded it, right, you see how easy it is to get the dust out of it. So, and of course, So again, it's assembled, but you can see that I had to put this piece in, and once I sanded all the edges around, I left a depression that had to be filled up with putty, right? And when I did that, after I did that and it dried, I used my strips here, right? And I used these to create the same pattern here that I did for the deck in both 8mm and 4mm strips, and that's how I created the back portion here. And of course, I just laid one solid piece along the back. So when I put the rest of this in, you'll see it. Now the keel's already in place. I don't want you to be surprised about that, but the keel's already in place, and that's my idea for trying to make this look as good as possible. So, with that being said, this piece right here, what I did was I cut. Now this is just, of course, I didn't want to break it off like that. That just shows you how soft it is. But I cut a notch just like this, right? Out of the center, right? And once I cleaned a good, it's going to be difficult for me because this is why balsa is different than boxwood. It's extremely, extremely soft. I went to, you saw my previous cutout, I actually was able to get it in 2 shots instead of the ones that I'm doing. So, of course you can see, the many times that you might have to do that. But if you put the angle right and you cut it just right, you'll fit it right in the notch, not necessarily where the keel is, where the stern keel piece is, but in the frame, the keel frame, the center part of the frame that went in here, you'll fit that right down into this groove as a foundation for your planks and your putty. So, my example would be, right, so, say I used these pieces right here, right? So, this would fit in just like that, as if this were the keel, and it will provide a foundation for the planks so that it, see how that's bowed or whatever, so the pressure of me assembling this would be a lot better. So that's, and you see how it stays. So a little glue, boom, that's how that's done. Hopefully this will give you an idea of how I actually put that section. Okay, so what you see now is the keel already in place. But what I want to point out with this particular assembly is how the frames went in. Thank goodness, I did not have to do many wedges here in the back. Matter of fact, I did hardly any. I was fortunate, and I had to cheat a little bit. I just wanted to let you know that I ended up using super glue to force these planks here in place. Now, as you saw from the photograph that I used, in putting the hull together, right, I pushed each plank towards the top or towards the deck and sealed them as much as possible. I used nails where I could, and then used the super glue to try to force the planks against the keel itself at the back. And the more I tried to pinch them towards the top, so I wouldn't have to use a whole lot of fillers, and I didn't have to modify the planks. As you can see, I I used a solid plank from front end to back end to try and make this work. So I thought that was the way it was supposed to go, so I tried to do that. Some places along here you'll see gaps still because I tried to use chisels, I tried to use sandpaper, blocks, and a whole lot of different techniques. Now, you'll find tools like these that I use. Sometimes I used them with a hammer, sometimes, I didn't. And, just to try to get a smooth look to the hull altogether and to help keep everything even to the touch and to give it a relatively smooth look. The closer I got to the bottom, the less nails I used, because the more I had to drill the holes in for the nails, it kept loosening up in the wood. I had to use more glue, so there was all kinds of stuff getting in the way. So I ended up stopping with the nails and just using the super glue. You can see in some parts of this I used a whole lot of putty just to try to make it work, and towards the end here, there's still some holes and chips in it or whatever, but you can see where the planks went in, and at the end where I shaved off the planks to put the strips in, it's a relatively smooth core. Now, doing this with the eye, I'm sure other people have more precise ways of doing it. You can see that, this side smooths right into the heel, and this side bulges out a little bit, and this is at a sharper curve, and it doesn't matter. It does, because you want to be precise when you're building models. But you'll see that this, all in all, is not as bad a look as I expected once I did it. Now, with the hull, I will show you a couple of other things. Okay, so now I want to show you, based on the photograph that you've already seen, this particular section here. Now, the picture that I showed you is minus the keel extension that's already in place. But what I did for that, right, is that you see how it goes out and then it comes in and then it twists at a 90 degrees. I'll show you how I twisted the planks to get them to fit this part. I think I've already showed you in another video, but I'll show you another one later. And in order to get the contour of the plank exactly right, as each plank would end, right, and it got closer to the end, it began to get more narrow and narrow and narrow. As you see in this section, it's smaller, in this section it's about the same, and in this section it's really, really small. So what I did was I put a plank in place, right? A nice long solid straight plank that looks something like this, one solid piece, and I measured it out how I wanted it to go and added a couple of centimeters on each end. And then with the hole, I marked from one finished corner to the next finished corner, and I marked them out in centimeters, right? And then measured out. So I would mark the distance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 24, 25, 26. And at each 1 centimeter mark, I would measure how wide the plank is going out to here. So this part may be 8 millimeters, this part may be 6 millimeters, this part may be 5 millimeters. And on each one of the planks, I would sand it down, right? And then I would lay this in place, right? And just contour this so that it would fit right in place and you would never even know that it was a specialty plank. Like for this side, of course, you can see that I did my best to try and, you know, make it smooth. This is where cutting the frame marks, at each frame, cutting it down so that the plank could sit flush, meant very little sanding was needed, right? So, matter of fact, here's a perfect example. This one here, right, is right up against the keel, but it demonstrated a little gap that would have been like, say, a little tiny piece of a plank, and it wasn't really worth doing, but I tried to fill that in with putty. But you can see, like, here's a plank right here that looks like I put in another piece there, probably because I broke it off. And then this part here I filled in with putty and tried to make it smooth. And at the end, you can see there where I sanded too much and rounded off the corner here, but you can see this final plank right here, right? It's thick, it gets really thin at this point, right? And then it comes out thick again, and then it narrows to a point roughly about here. So I know it looks like two planks. It might be two planks, I don't know. This side looks like it's one solid piece, but you can see the result is the same. So that's how I wanted to show you how I did that.